KPBS On Demand is supported by UC San Diego's Art Power, presenting cellist Joshua Roman, performing from his album Immunity, alongside music by J.S. Bach and more. Sunday, June 22nd at UC San Diego's Epstein Family Amphitheater. Reserve your tickets at artpower.ucsd.edu.
Welcome back to another episode of listener-supported KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. I'm Beth Accomando. Someone who loves film, I respect and admire those who work hard to preserve film history. On my last podcast, I spoke with Fox archivist Sean Belston about preserving a studio's history. Today, I speak with Josef Lindner, the preservation officer at the Academy Film Archives. I may hate the Academy for some of its Oscar choices, but I have nothing but praise for the work it does to preserve film history. My discussion with Lindner will focus in part on the epic work the Academy did in restoring a pre-code comedy, naughtily titled Cock of the Air. But what else would you expect from producer Howard Hughes?
As the code was not well established when the film came out, Howard Hughes and director Tom Buckingham were able to sneak a lot past the censors. So what was removed and why? The cuts are well documented in the 139-page file of the production code papers held at the Academy's Margaret Herrick Library. A key concern was the lead actor, Lieutenant Roger Craig, an American pilot. A member of the censorship board refers to him as, quote, a philandering and lecherous young man who pursued rather lustful affairs, end quote.
That was film preservationist Heather Linville introducing Cock of the Air in 2016 for the Academy's premiere of the restored print. Cock of the Air is a perfect example of a pre-code comedy loaded with verbal and visual innuendo. I was so enchanted with the film at the TCM Film Festival a couple of years ago that I worked with Film Geek San Diego to program it as part of a year-long film series I do with Miguel Rodriguez. I'll be co-hosting a screening of the Academy's restored print at Digital Gym Cinema on May 5th. Here's a tease of the film.
You know, when my guardian angel came to me in a dream and said, brother, get yourself transferred down to Italy, I thought it was on account of there being very little fighting going on down here. But if I'd known it was you he was sending me to, I'd have bought him a new halo or something.
Don't you like fighting, Lieutenant Craig?
No, I dislike making enemies. I want everybody to love me.
Later.
The film was made in 1932 when the production code dictating what could and could not be shown on screen was in place, but not fully being enforced. The resulting film serves up a delicious sex comedy about a lusty chanteuse and the womanizing pilot, or cock of the air, that she sets her sights on. Hold tight while we take this short break, and then I'll be back with my interview with Josef Lindner about the fascinating detective work it takes to restore a censored film to its original mischievous intent.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Splatero, helping homeowners pay off debt by offering streamlined access to your home's equity with no additional monthly payments or new debt. Splatero provides a lump sum of payment in exchange for a share of your home's future value. Pre-qualification is available at splatero.com.
So for most people who live outside of Hollywood and Los Angeles, they probably associate the Academy with just the Oscars. So give us a little insight or a quick overview of kind of what things are you involved with that the Academy's doing?
Yes, I'm involved with the Academy Film Archive, which is one of the major endeavors of the Academy's foundation. It's nonprofit work. There's also the Margaret Herrick Library. There's a grant program and educational work. But we have a collection of motion picture film here on site, and it's been part of the Academy's interest to pursue the history of the art form almost since the beginning. And we have motion picture film in our vaults, which are humidity and temperature controlled. And we do active preservation and restoration to make sure that these movies aren't just collected and stored properly, but that they're available on screen in a theatrical format in the same quality that those original film artists made them and audiences saw them and experienced them. So it's part of that same mandate of keeping the history of cinema heritage alive in theaters, is that we've got this actual physical evidence of the art of cinema, which is important to know because most people may not be aware of the idea that since 1930, 80% of movies, and this isn't just the U.S., this is across the world, it's Europe, it's other parts of the globe, 80% of all movies ever made have been lost forever. it's not just that they're hard to see or they're not on a nice Criterion disc or on streaming. They are literally gone, and no matter how far you travel, you will never be able to see them. So from the birth of the art form to the dawn of sound, we've lost 4/5 of all of our heritage. And so much has already been lost. We're working to make sure that future generations don't suffer such problems, and that both the history of the cinema from its last 100 and some years and in the future will be something that stays alive in cinema theaters.
And if people are in the Los Angeles area, can they actually go in and look through the archives in any sort of way? Is there any way for them to appreciate some of the stuff that you have?
Well, very slowly we've been working to put the collection online in an accessible form. There's also an online form you can just ask us what we have if you're looking to do research. So you don't necessarily have to come in to look through what we may have. But then if you want to examine things, yes, we have an on-site public access space. But we also have the material isn't just here, it goes out. So we do loans all over the world. We send out films both on film and digitally to cinematheques, to archives, to film festivals, and to independent theaters on a regular basis. So you can see it if you come here, but you can also see it on screen at all of these places, these centers of film throughout the country and the world.
And what kind of preservation are you able to do at the Academy? Do you actually have people on staff that are going through old negatives or cleaning up old prints or things like that?
Absolutely. We're a staff of 4 who are dedicated to film preservation. That's 4 people who are doing all the research that builds up to a project, but then are physically looking at the elements to analyze them. Sometimes it's not even clear what they are. There's so many films that have been forgotten, we're just learning what the material is in the first place. Other times we start with the title and then have to find the pieces, call filmmakers, call archives, call labs. We physically inspect it for its condition. We don't have our own laboratory work on site, so we've worked with both photochemical labs doing, just film-to-film copying and for protection and for making new projection prints. And then we work with a lot of digital vendors who are specialized in moving image restoration. Then when we have those materials in their best new formats, they come back to the archive for protection to make sure they're not lost again or never lost in the future.
Do you have any stories of odd ways that you've gotten film elements? I mean, you hear stories of oh yeah, somebody found this film under their bed, or when someone passed away, they opened a closet and found film that had been just stashed away there. I was just wondering if you had any personal memories of anything like that.
Well, we've had all kinds of things. I mean, sometimes we're fortunate that we were connected to a filmmaker or their estate, and they come to us that way, and it's all there. Other times we do a lot of outreach to filmmakers, in particular because we're interested in specific areas, say underrepresented forms like documentaries and student films and short films, but also those filmmakers who were nominated for Oscars. And a lot of times we have to look them up and call them. And I was researching a documentary from the late 60s in the early days of Google. This was maybe 2005, of the Internet, and looking people up. I asked him, are you the person who made this film that won an Academy Award in the late 1960s? And he said, I am. I've been sitting here waiting for the day someone would call me. I know where the materials are, and they weren't at an archive. They were at a small university in San Jose. We're used to doing this kind of detective work, calling certain labs and certain distributors, but I never would have looked for the material there. And without just cold calling this person, hoping it was him, never would have gotten to the actual film elements, which is kind of a key point. Without finding somewhere to start that survives, if we don't have that film to begin with, no amount of digital technology in the future will allow us to do anything. It's not about the power of the computers. We have to have the basis, the physical material to save. And when I spoke to him, I finally had it. Same thing, filmmakers who said it was in my basement and I had a washing machine overflow and the humidity damaged it. Someone had put it under their bed and not opened the box. And when they finally opened the box, they realized the lab had sent them someone else's film from China. And it even had an address of the person in China, and the person in China said, no, I never got your film. I don't know why you have mine. But also, recently, some of those major film labs that did high-volume work have been closing or at least shuttering their film work, and just overwhelmed with trying to find people whose accounts go back sometimes 30, 40, or 50 years, and have come to us to bring in these collections that they don't want to throw out, both for good ethical reasons but also for legal reasons. And then we have to go through this massive amount of sort of abandoned material from the film labs. And when we do, we can sometimes identify those filmmakers and call them, and they say, geez, I never even thought that I left that material there, because one of the challenges of making movies is people need to think about, how am I going to make the next one? Who's going to fund it? How am I going to get everyone to agree to give me these resources and work with me? And they don't have the time to think, and now what do I do to protect the one I just finished? And that's why we're always doing this detective work, to search them out, to find these lost things.
Can I ask which documentary that was?
That was a documentary called Journey into Self, because we were trying to show, it was called Oscar's Docs. We were showing every winning documentary. And the good news is that, with the exception of one from the first year that got an honorary award, no winning documentary that we know of has been lost. But many of them were on the edge of being lost. And Journey into Self was something I don't think at the time we had any copy of, which itself is kind of a complicated title, because that year you'll see that another film won the Academy Award and was later disqualified, and so then Journey into Self was awarded it. And that was one of the rare instances of Academy history of that happening. But I was still looking for that gentleman, and we didn't have anything on that film.
So how did you get into this work?
Well, now there are formal programs for film preservation and film archiving and moving image archiving, which is beyond, of course, just motion picture film. But when I was in grad school, there wasn't. I was in grad school for critical studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My colleague, who's now my boss, in fact, was also at school with me, who was a projectionist. And we also had an interest in looking at film deeper into collections, things that hadn't been digitized or were just on VHS or Laserdisc at the time. And so we handled a lot of motion picture film. And it was my supervisor who sort of moved from academia into other pursuits and realized that having this background of both studying film history and handling film, that archival work was ideal for it. And then he later convinced me to try it out as well. So we came in through that background of understanding the physical elements of film, but also having a researcher's perspective from critical studies, both of which I think are essential. But it's a fairly new field, so many of us came in through sort of these related areas.
Well, I'll say that I partially got in. I've always been interested in film and in film preservation, but attending the TCM Film Festival, where they make this real concerted effort to show everything in the highest possible quality that they can, and screening stuff on nitrate and on brand new 35 millimeter prints. It gave me an even greater appreciation of what goes into that. And I did want to talk to you specifically about one film that I saw at TCM Film Festival, which was Cock of the Air.
Yes.
Which was this pre-code comedy. And they talked about the extensive work you guys did. So I wanted to have you discuss a little bit about the extra mile you went on this particular film.
And Cock of the Air is one of those titles. As I said, sometimes we know what we're looking for and we start looking for it. Almost no one in the world was looking for Cock of the Air. It was forgotten. It was on the edge of being lost. It's sandwiched between Scarface and Hell's Angels and other high-profile films that Howard Hughes produced. And so it wasn't even on those lists of films that are lost and people are looking for. No one even knew about it. And I remember the donor came to us with the material and said, I've got this film that I thought about releasing because I thought it was PD. I'm not sure it is, but I'm not sure I can really do anything with it. It is nitrate. There's, I think one of the reels of sound deteriorated, so you've got 9 reels of picture and 8 reels of sound. And I said, okay, that sounds interesting. I don't know this title, and we started looking into it. And it was my colleague, Heather Linville. She's the one who would have spoke at TCM. She's now, and she would be doing this interview with you if she was still here. She took a job at the Library of Congress. But I worked with Heather very closely on this project, so that's why I can talk about Cock of the Air. That we looked in and said, okay, are we missing a reel? That's a very common thing. One reel goes bad. Nitrate, when it goes bad, it just eats itself. It deteriorates. It can eat through the can it's in and eat into the can below it. Nitrate film can be very robust if it's properly processed and then stored correctly. But this was our first assumption. There's one less reel of sound, so we're missing 10 minutes or so of sound. And the thought was, well, are there any positive copies around projection copies? When Heather looked at it, she was a little confused, and she said, this soundtrack is not missing a single reel. It's missing little bits all over the place that add up to about 10 minutes. It's not missing one 10-minute chunk. And with a little digging, again, she went right to our own Margaret Herrick library where we have the files of the MPAA production code. She found out about the battles that Howard Hughes had with trying to get this film approved and the sort of pre-censorship that was going on, although it was sort of just at that time where the code was being developed. So we believe the film may have been finished in its full version and then had to be cut afterwards. So what it looked like we had is a master positive of the uncensored picture, and we had the censored audio. That's why there was 10 minutes missing, and not in all one scene, not in all one chunk from little places. The reason Heather actually knew this is because she'd done her homework, and I don't know if you've seen the Academy close-up. Heather's on there specifically. She mentions this moment that one of the censored scenes is the female lead trying to protect herself by wearing a suit of armor, and then her pursuer follows with a can opener. And that gag was actually mentioned in some of the reviews and was one of the things that they were forced to cut. And when she saw that, winding on a bench, saw that image, she said, "This is the uncensored picture." And we were missing those 10 minutes of audio at different pieces. And as we talked about, we looked everywhere. We didn't want to get into this without saying, okay, we're missing 10 minutes of audio that were censored. Let's make sure we know everything that exists. There was one 16-millimeter projection copy at the UCLA Film and Television Archive, which is very handy. They're right here in town. And strangely, it was in the collection of Mel Torme. He had some film there. And they lent us that film, and it turned out it was the censored version. So we thought, okay, we don't have anything. And then we kept looking. We sent letters to every archive, all the English language speaking archives where we thought it might have been distributed, and then we sent it out to many groups of film archives and archivists through the world, and had no hits. No one has yet come up with any copy of this. So we thought, well, okay, we're missing 10 minutes of audio. What do you do? Do you show the censored version? Well, we'd already had one sort of vote that's the film, once it was been cut up, wasn't necessarily so great anymore. Could we fill in this audio in some other way? Well, we kept looking, and Heather found a script. Okay, we've got the dialogue, so we could just do subtitles for those pieces. And we tried a quick video copy where we put, because we wanted to be authentic, we said if we don't have the audio, we shouldn't be going re-recording things and trying to fake it. That just doesn't sound very authentic, and we're worried about that. Heather and some of my other colleagues just thought, let's try it. So we did the subtitles, and having just silence and some text, it felt really flat, especially for, even though this is early sound, this is a comedy, it's very lively, and having, cutting to text with no audio just really was clunky. And then we did a test using not actors, but our own internal staff, Heather and a few other archivists we pulled in, to read the lines. And when you watched it in video with even amateurs reading the lines and nothing else, it was so much easier to view, and it made so much more sense, and it didn't interfere with your ability to enjoy the film. And you have to think about presentation. These are filmmakers, film artists who made this to be seen by audiences, and they never intended it to be this heavily censored, and we do have some evidence they had some copies that were sent out in this full version. So we do want to keep that version. We were looking towards it, and we were fortunate that someone in the Academy's administration had mentioned this to people, someone in the actors branch, and said we could get some voiceover actors, and they would love to help out and do some recording. And again, as I said, we were very hesitant to jump into recreating this, but a number of factors came to help us. We had the script that Heather found. She kept doing research, and she found a score. So we found some music, some written music for some of the pieces that were missing. From the collection at the University of Las Vegas and Howard Hughes' material, we didn't find the uncensored audio. We were hoping we would, but we found these silver discs that were the master discs for the sound on disc that went out with early Vitafilm films, where there was essentially a record playing along with the picture. And we didn't have the actual records, those large discs. We had the silver stampers that made those discs. So we had to find someone in the world who could capture the master disc without damaging it. And we didn't find the uncensored audio, but we found one song, a complete performance of a song that was cut. So we have the script. We have a song that fills in the audio, at least in part. We've got some music, we've got a score, and we've got some professional actors who are willing to help out to re-record this audio and kind of finish the film and put it back together again. And the very last thing we thought is, we never want people to misunderstand what's been recreated and what's authentic. And so when we were doing this, and we were doing it digitally because that was really the only way to do it, we thought, let's put a little icon in the lower corner with it's a little frame of film and with a little scissors, a little drawing. that shows that this is a recreated scene. Now, the picture you're seeing, that's authentic, and that would have been a lot harder or literally impossible to recreate. If the picture had been missing, all we could do is just go from the script and write a little descriptive scene, and that would have been very jarring because some of the cuts are as little as a few lines, some are maybe a few minutes, but they're little pieces all throughout the film. So dropping in the audio worked very smoothly, but our fear was someone in the future would mistake what was restoration and what was recreation, I should say, and what was original. But we did hesitate because sometimes putting something in suggesting that it's recreated, if you put a little date in a silent film to show that you've just guessing on a title card, some people say that takes me out of the movie. But we were very surprised. People loved to see it, not because they thought it distracted them, but because they were then in on the process of seeing what had been censored, which I have to admit is sometimes puzzling why some things get cut and some things are left in. So we were worried that people might find that too distracting, but really they were quite interested in seeing, what existed and what had to be recreated. And so I'm glad that worked out so well that we were able to at least flag, without distracting from the movie, flag where we came in, and we had to take a little bit of a leap and try to recreate it, but that it still is a viewing experience in a theater that people could enjoy and wouldn't have a problem with.
I would hope that the filmmakers, if they saw this recreation, would be happy with it. Just looking through the production code files and seeing how hard Howard Hughes fought to keep the uncensored version out there and then ultimately had to relent and take out a lot of material. I would hope that he would be pleased that audiences are seeing the version of Cock of the Air that he intended audiences to see. To see it now in its full glory, it's very exciting, and I can't wait for audiences to enjoy it as well.
That was a clip from the Academy's close-up on the restoration of Cock of the Air with then film preservationist Heather Linville. I'll be back with more of my interview with Josef Lindner after this short break.
KPBS On Demand is supported by UC San Diego's Art Power, presenting cellist Joshua Roman, performing from his album Immunity, alongside music by J.S. Bach and more, Sunday, June 22nd at UC San Diego's Epstein Family Amphitheater. Reserve your tickets at artpower.ucsd.edu.
And so you did actually get actors who tried to kind of impersonate or mimic the voices of the actors who were in the film.
Yes. My understanding is that some of them were voiceover specialists and some are just actors, and I feel like it was someone, there were a couple of Academy members who had casting background, and we didn't, in the archive, and that's definitely not my background, so we were just so fortunate that there were active members of the Academy who wanted to help the archive. But yes, these actors, they spent some time to hear it. I think it was a challenge for them. They were very interested in the idea of, even if they'd done voiceover or done dubbing of themselves, they were working with other actors and lines that weren't familiar to them. So they were looking at the script and looking at these at the picture and trying to come up with a performance. And it's good that I think we were never trying to mimic the performance so well that you never could tell. I think you could probably tell that it is a different voice. But again, it's close enough that it fills in without distracting you, but isn't trying to fake it. There's no computer modulation to people's voice to try to make them sound like the actors. These are new actors, and they're doing good performances. And again, not making up lines or trying to fill in things we didn't know. We knew the script, we knew the dialogue, and we knew how it sunk. Again, just so fortunate that everything came together, that we had so much documentation beyond the actual. I was saying how the physical film is important, but sometimes you have a piece of film and you know nothing about it. It may be interesting to watch, but you still don't know when this was shot, how it was used, and why they actually filmed it. That's often with, say, newsreels or home movies. You get some raw footage. It's very exciting, but you want to know more. The whole point is to have the film back in front of audiences as those original filmmakers wanted it. And so that's the very last part of our work is when it's on screen again, and that's the most exciting and fulfilling part.
Do you have any personal memories of something that you've worked on that gave you particular satisfaction or that was a particular challenge?
One of the projects, I can talk about two projects kind of briefly, and they're bigger projects, not a single film. The Academy was involved for a long time in a project for the director from India, the Bengali director Satyajit Ray. the story started that in the 90s they were giving an honorary award to him, and unfortunately he was ill. He spoke from satellite from his hospital bed, but it was a huge honor to him. He was very moved. But people started to realize they were trying to put the clips together, and as we were honoring the filmmaker, the films weren't being honored. They were being neglected. They were falling apart. And so there was a big project in the 90s. 9 of his feature films were restored by the Academy in collaboration with Sony and the Merchant Ivory, And after that, we continued on. And as part of those initial 9 films, we did some of his most well-known work is a trilogy of films called the Apu Trilogy. And a key part of this story, and this was before I actually got involved, is that just as this restoration was starting to happen, some of the elements had been moved to London for a laboratory to make some new films to get them in distribution to hope to get this interest in the restoration work. And there was a fire at that laboratory, and those 6 negatives were destroyed. And that was one of the great tragedies of the modern film preservation era, is losing. I mean, this has happened historically, but to happen in the 90s was really shocking. At the time, all the other pieces from the world were brought together, and the Apu trilogy was restored with traditional film means, to the point where people in India had told me it looked better, than it did in Ray's first years when he first made the films. Fortunately, when the fire happened in London, there was this idea we can't leave these materials, even though they're not usable with the technology they had. And frankly, these burned reels were left in our storage area, kind of ignored, because it was unfortunately a reminder of such a sad time. And no one thought there was anything we could do with it. But when Criterion came to us, just a few years ago and said, we need to go back to the Apu trilogy, we want to restore them, and we want clean elements without those subtitles, I said, let's look at those cans. Let's look at those burned cans and see what's left. And the real miracle of that story was that second film, and again, sometimes it's just fortunate how things work out. Of the first film, Pathar Panchali, there was maybe about 6 reels total, 6 pieces that were long and usable. For the last film, there was only 3. But for that middle one, at least 60% of the movie was salvageable from that original negative once you took off the charred, melted pieces around the edges. Now, it was badly damaged, it was warped, it was shrunken, and it had all kinds of other issues. But we took it to the one lab in the world that has specialized in rehydrating and scanning the most difficult damaged film. Lots of other people can do it well, but L'Immagine Ritrovata in Bologna scanned this film, even though sometimes it had no perf left and it was warped and shrunk, still smelled like, had that smell of burnt film, that ashy smell. And that Blu-ray set, those DCPs exist, and they can be shown. And the miracle of the Apu trilogy, literally rising from the flames, that's one of my, one of the more exciting stories. Another larger project is, of course, a project we've had with Cuba. The Academy had members who went to Havana to go to the Cuban Film Festival as part of the International Outreach Committee's work to talk to people in different parts of the world, different film industries, to speak film artist to film artist. And fortunately, someone along the line said, okay, why don't we also think about film preservation? So I got to go to Havana in 2011 and started a conversation saying we'd love to see some Cuban films preserved. The high humidity has meant that so many of their films are damaged and at risk. And we were able to bring in 2 films by a director named Tomás Gutiérrez Alea, who has a connection to the Academy because he co-directed the only Cuban film to be nominated for an Academy Award, Strawberries and Chocolate, in the 90s. That's been really rewarding, and it led to us to do a new project. We're hoping to do 2 more films that will be Cuban feature films that will debut later this year.
And if people are interested in what you're doing, what's the best place for them to go? What's your website?
That's a good question. I know that the Academy Film Archive has a part of the Oscars.org. A good place to start is Oscars.org, which shows all of the activities of the Academy, both the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and then all of our foundation work. So the library, the museum, and the archive all have pages on there. We have collection profiles that tend to highlight in some more detail specific collections in the film archive, including things by filmmaker or studios or subjects. There's one on home movies. There's one on the collection of Roger Corman's films that we have, on the silent collection on nitrate. I think the webpage is a good place to start for that.
That was Josef Lindner, Preservation Officer at the Academy Film Archive. If you're in San Diego, you can see the Academy's restored print of Cock of the Air May 5th at 1 p.m. at Digital Gym Cinema. Thanks again for listening to the podcast. Cinema Junkie will be back with some real scientists talking about movie science. So till our next Film Fix, I'm Beth Accomando, your resident Cinema Junkie.
Only Here is a new KPBS podcast about the place where San Diego and Tijuana meet.
Who at 6 years old says, oh, I'm going to go to America tonight?
Only Here tells stories you would only find in a border town.
You can make a Frankenstein drone.
Find Only Here on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Only Here is a new KPBS podcast about the place where San Diego and Tijuana meet.
Who at 6 years old says, oh, I'm going to go to America tonight?
Only Here tells stories you would only find in a border town.
You can make a Frankenstein drone.
Find Only Here on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Latino Legacy Foundation, presenting their Storyteller series, Reach for the Stars with Ellen Ochoa, the first Latina astronaut, former NASA director, and San Diego native. Sunday, June 29th. More at latinolegacyfoundation.org.